Hello friends. Association of Bengalis Kansas City Sangam welcomes you all in Sangam Talk Show. Association of Bengalis Kansas City Sangam is proud to launch Sangam Talk Show series. The goal of this show is to learn from our community members and from each other. It will help us to keep abreast of various issues surrounding us and to give us an opportunity to work towards a better solution. We will eventually cover topics from various areas, including science, arts, medicine, entertainment, spirituality, law, journalism, etc. We need your participation, support, and any constructive comments, suggestions you have to improve this show or our endeavor. It is not possible without your participation, without your suggestion. Now it is my honor and pleasure to introduce Dr. Pakhi Chaudhuri, Assistant Clinical Professor, Department of Pediatrics, School of Medicine, University of Colorado, Denver. She has completed MD from Brown University School of Medicine. Her area of interest is pediatrics. She is a recipient of many awards, including Green Business Leadership Award by San Juan Citizens Alliance, Durango, Colorado. She is deeply involved with many organizations, including American Academy of Pediatrics, Physicians for Social Responsibility, and American Academy of Medical Acupuncturists. Her community service history is remarkable, and it is our honor to have her in this Sangam Talk Show first episode. She is also daughter of our beloved Dr. Pakhi Chaudhary and Dr. Sudha Chaudhary. I also welcome Dr. Animesh Dhar as a moderator of this show. Dr. Dhar is an accomplished researcher, completed his PhD in physiology. He worked on development of natural products targeting cancer. He was associated with University of Kansas Medical Center for a long time, and now he is working as consultant related to COVID, viral biology, and cancer therapeutics. His research work based on role of saffron in pancreatic cancer is remarkable. Thank you, Dr. Dhar, to be here in Sangam Talk Show. So we should not wait anymore, and my job is over. Now I'm going to request Dr. Dhar to conduct this remarkable talk show, and all the best to all of you. Thank you.
It is our honor and our organization hosting Dr. Pakhi Chaudhuri, and she will talk today very important information about the food and which we get everyday life. So I request you to listen her talk and an incredible information she will give it to you. And Pakhi, it's all of your stage.
All right, well, thank you. I am now trying to share my screen so you can see my talk. Can everybody see that? Yeah, excellent.
Yeah.
All right, so I want to start out by just thanking Amitabh in particular for inviting me to do this, and Animesh being willing to moderate. I didn't realize that he had such a pertinent research topic to this until I spoke to my parents about what he was doing for work. So anyway, I just want to give the biggest overview that I want to give is that I left pediatrics as far as being a primary care provider because I noticed over the course of my 20 years that children were becoming more and more ill. And as I got to the bottom of why they were getting ill, I noticed that I could make a lot of dietary changes and suddenly things could really shift. And the base problem started to look like the food system was actually really broken. And people are struggling in their lives, and you all know this yourselves, that people are struggling with their own health and their children's health in really unique ways, in ways that you don't remember people struggling 20, 30 years ago. And now they are forced to face all kinds of challenges. And it is for this reason that I'm feeling really privileged to be able to speak to a group of people about what I've learned over the course of 20 years of practice. So I want to start with this map and just say this is the map that we're used to the United States, but all these small colors, different shades, are actually representing about 400 different Native American nations that once was on this land. And so I really feel strongly that we need to do sort of a land acknowledgement to the people that were on the land of Kansas City. We are on the unceded and stolen ancestral lands of the Ottawa, Missouri, Osage, Kaw, Kansa peoples. And I kind of want to point out that it doesn't look so radically different from this map that everyone might be familiar with. People in this land had different language, different cultures, different food that they loved. And it's really similar to what's happening here and that everyone can really relate to. And we also have our own tradition of Ayurvedic science that says that, hey, eating fresh, seasonally, and locally is really a big step towards healing our bodies and keeping ourselves healthy. And I am highly suspicious that one day we will be looking towards these people to get some help with how to live on this land in a sustainable way. Science is always proving some of these ancient wisdoms out, and it's always fun when that happens. So, you know, Montclair State University demonstrated that if you go broccoli seasonally, it has double the level of vitamin C than broccoli that's been shipped from out of season, from out of place. So just a way to start out with a little bit of good news, because I have a whole bunch of more challenging news to come. So what's the bad news? The bad news is that chronic illness is now the new normal for children and adults. And I started my pediatric practice in about 2000. And so one can see, so this is a slide that shows how the rate of autism or the prevalence of autism has increased over time. So when I started my practice in 2000, and let's just say that a given number of people in a pediatric practice for one doctor is on average 2,000. It's a little bit high of a number, but it's a good round number to work with. So at that time, that would mean that I had seen about 8 kids in my practice. Now, when I was starting in 2000, I didn't initially know 2,000 families. So let's just say over the course of a couple of years, I knew 1,000 families. That meant 4 autistic kids. And that sounds about right of when I started practicing medicine. As time went on in my pediatric practice, I saw this explosion of children having autism. This is 1 in 59, and the current number is 1 in 54. So that number went from, if you have 2,000 kids, 8 to, what is that, 30, 40, 40 kids. And when I've done the math on that, and when I looked at my practice before I left, we were tracking pretty much on track with that. And it's really disturbing. So 1 out of 6 children has a neurodevelopmental problem, has ADHD. We are also seeing an explosion in food allergies. You know, there's a lot of people who are debating, like, are we really seeing more food allergies? Are people just saying that they have food sensitivities? But we have data from insurance companies that show, this is data from insurance companies that show anaphylactic food reactions, meaning life-threatening food reactions, have gone up exponentially. And I am kind of wanting to share with you that if this is the tip of the iceberg, that the bottom of this iceberg or the bottom of this pyramid is actually really huge. And people might not be having death from certain foods, but that doesn't mean that it is not contributing to them being unwell. And I'm going to speak to that a little bit because I took an endless number of children off of gluten and dairy all day long and watched lives change. And then many of them had to go off of other foods. And it became crazy, frankly. I mean, I just felt like, how are people doing this? How are they taking their children off of 7 different foods and getting through their day? But they were doing it because the children were improving and or dramatically better. And it wasn't worth it to not do it. So the other thing that I want to share in the adult world, and this is happening in children too, is obesity. So I didn't throw on, just for time's sake and clarity, the obesity curve looks exactly the same, and the diabetes curve looks exactly the same. Americans, there's 42% of people in America are obese at this moment, and by 2030, it will be 50%. So we have a really major problem. And what I want to say, though, is that, you know, what was going on here and what was going on here? Like, what happened before all of this crazy started to happen? And what's really important and interesting to me, and I think the subject of the talk, that the good news is that I'm hoping to share information with you that will make it such that you're not seeing as many of the toxins and the things that are contributing to this tsunami of medical problems for everybody. And so, you know, this is just a slide showing, hey, these are your genes. And we used to think that they weren't changeable, but we now know that even what your parents or grandparents ate, chemicals they were exposed to, trauma they were exposed to, stress and infection can affect following generations, which also is a good thing because you can have really positive nutrition and remove chemicals from your life and affect future generations. But then our environment, what I'm kind of going to be talking about mostly in this talk, is that our environment has changed without our knowing about it. No one made a big announcement that our food system is completely different than it used to be. And that's a little bit of what we're talking about. But the good news is that there are ways to offset some of these big challenges that are coming our way. So, yeah, so we can make choices that really contribute to health, and we can make choices that are contributing more to disease. And not, of course, that you can control everything that will cause disease, but there's a lot that we can control, and it's nice to be able to focus on that. So, you know, what am I proposing might be going on here? And it's not just myself that's proposing this. There are really a lot of people that are saying that this is playing a major role in the healthcare crisis that we're seeing, or wellness crisis that we're seeing. So I went to a talk right before I left Seattle 20 years ago that was by Physicians for Social Responsibility. And they stated, hey, there are 84,000 chemicals that we have in the United States, and less than 1% of them have been tested in any real sort of way. And it was a little shocking to hear because, you know, we're in a land where other countries joke about how safety, you know, malpractice, and, you know, you have to have a sign above a cliff that says, you know, don't step over this cliff. So there's some feeling in this country that somebody's looking out for you because we have all these safety measures. But frankly, when it comes to chemicals, they are innocent until proven guilty. And they can even be guilty and not be taken off the market. And that is happening all day long. When you go to the grocery store, when you go to Home Depot and Walmart, and you buy that weed killer, that pesticide, that soap, that lotion, that food, you don't have to be told that it has something on it or in it that can hurt you. It might have a small little thing that says, you know, maybe toxic if you drink it, etc. But they're not going to talk about, they don't have to be taken off the shelf if they cause cancer. And the reason why the chemical companies say that is like, well, it's a dose thing. You know, if you have too much of something, of course it's going to be bad for you. But, you know, when then the question is like, how much dosing are we really getting? You know, there's all these chemicals out there, fine, but is it really affecting us? So a group called the Environmental Working Group did a study where they took 10 minority babies and took their cord blood, and they showed that they had over 200 industrial chemicals in their cord blood. They've also studied all ages and seen that there was 493 chemicals. And I don't think it takes any sort of research to say that this doesn't sound like a great idea, but to kind of really drive home why it's not a great idea is that, you know, this is a developing brain, and my neurons are moving from one place to another. And these chemicals, even one hit at one moment, they don't even have to be there all the time, can change how that chemical or that neuron is going to move. Fetal alcohol syndrome is actually only seen, the face is only seen if alcohol is drank on a very specific day of pregnancy. If the mother drinks every other day but that day, the face will not happen. You'll have fetal alcohol effect, but you will not get the facial changes. So really important to understand how the fetus and developing brain, and now we know that everybody does neurogenesis. We used to think it was just babies and children, but we're all doing it. And is that how people stayed healthy historically? And now some of those things are changing, and it's contributing to not being able to remain as healthy and vital as we used to be. So how are these entering our body? This is a benign slide about, a family going to get some breakfast at a restaurant, and we're having juice and pancakes and croissants and eggs and bacon, oatmeal, hash browns, pretty standard breakfast in America. But what they don't realize that they're getting is they're also getting a variety of pesticides, Frankenstein wheat, which I'll talk about later, genetically modified feed in all of the animal products, whether they be egg or bacon or milk, and a variety of pesticides. This pesticides to drink is actually, the number is 13 pesticides in those two different beverages, which I did not put here because it felt sort of overwhelmingly challenging that is the kind of exposure people are dealing with. So diet is a primary source of pesticide exposure. So I'm not the only one saying this. This is a pediatrician who is also a toxicologist and has a master's in public policy, who wrote a book called Sicker, Fatter, Poorer. He identifies pesticides, plastics, BPA in foods, and flame retardants that are oftentimes sprayed on new furniture, oftentimes on all of the seating in an airplane, et cetera, sort of ubiquitous, sadly, playing a role by being a hormone disrupting chemical. And it's lowering IQ points, autism, ADHD, obesity, type 2 diabetes. So this list is becoming a little familiar. I think, so at the very beginning of the talk, these were the very things that I was seeing in my practice and that we're all seeing. And now there's undeniable links to these things that are all everywhere in our lives. And then there are some additional things that he talks about that these have impact on. And so, so then you're sort of like, okay, maybe, are there ways to protect yourself from this? If you're the person gardening, sadly, our migrant farm workers are not offered this kind of gear, though they should, because they're oftentimes drenched in these pesticides. So again, if it's not for ourselves, it's for these people. And then the earth itself gets fungicides and pesticides, and things underneath are dying, and insects and other really critical creatures to our ecosystem are being harmed by all these chemicals that we feel as though we're needing for our food. So pesticides are not good for us. Plenty of studies showing decreased cognitive scores, behavioral attention problems, asthma, cancer, problems on the reproductive system. This autism study is really interesting because these were mothers who were pregnant that were within 2,000 meters of commercial agricultural farms where normal spraying of pesticides were allowed. And it was kind of the top 10 or 11 pesticides that are used. And they showed an increase in rate of the kids in autism when when the child was in utero and there was a spraying. And they could actually demonstrate that those kids not only increase risk of autism, but increased risk of autism with additional cognitive delays. And then sadly, if these kids got another hit when they were under a year of age and there was another spraying, they could show that if they were within 2,000 meters of this spraying, that they had additional IQ point loss, which is really disturbing and really tragic. We also are seeing a pollinator decline, that part of pesticides are killing off some of our bees, and 30% of all crops are dependent directly or indirectly on bees. I've heard higher numbers, but I'll go with this lower number. But each individual almond has to have a bee, has to pollinate each individual almond. And that's how so much of our world works. So we just have to be really careful about what we're doing. So the good news is that if you start to eat organic, that in just a week, you can reduce your body pesticide load by 60%. They've shown that children being given an organic diet can reduce urinary pesticide levels that are coming out, kind of meaning like, hey, they're not seeing as many pesticides. And then this really exciting study that just came out that I discovered for this talk in 2018 from JAMA, which is a very well-reputed medical journal, was a study where they followed 70,000 adults and determined who was eating more organic food and who was eating more conventionally grown food. And they were able to show that the people that had been eating for this study period, 7 years, more organic food, tend to have, there was protection against several cancers. So there's good news that you can take action. Sometimes it's incredibly overwhelming for people to say, hey, we're going to go all organic. I know that people are very concerned about the cost of organic, which is a real thing, of course. And the Environmental Working Group makes your life a little bit easier and says, hey, these top 12 foods, if you get them conventionally grown, they seem to be the dirty dozen. They have the most number of pesticides on them when they arrive ready for you to eat. And so this list is sort of a nice list, and it's actually longer, but the top 12 are definitely the worst offenders. And then again, the Clean 15 is another list of foods that don't require many pesticides to grow. So it's kind of nice to keep track of that. Like, okay, if I really have to pick and choose, like maybe I don't get organic cabbage, but I really do get organic, strawberries for my kids, especially. So having said that, I've been able to have, I don't know how they did it, but I have had single mothers who have kids with autism really go gluten and dairy free and really go towards as much organic in their world as they can for their children. And so I kind of say if these women can do it, then really all of us can do something. So the next topic that I want to bring into, so that was sort of like what's kind of on our food, around us a little bit. But genetically modified foods is a very new player, and it snuck into our food system with very little oversight. So genetically modified foods, just to clarify what that actually is that they are bioengineered foods in the sense that you've taken a food, a plant, and bioengineers have inserted a few genes here and there for whatever reason, to be more pest resistant, to grow, have a better shelf life, etc. The FDA has never conducted their own studies on genetically modified foods. And all the safety studies that say that genetically modified foods are safe for humans have been done by the companies that provide us with genetically modified foods. So there's a problem there. The other piece around this is that other countries are saying, absolutely no, we will not have genetically modified foods. We do not understand if they are going to have a negative impact on the health of our people. And they are banning them completely or partially banning them. Meanwhile, in the United States, we have really double down on genetically modified foods. And per Dr. Shitri Klein, who you'll hear more about, she's a pediatric neurologist, 80% of the food in North America contains genetically modified organisms. The good news is that if you're eating organic, you are not eating genetically modified foods. So it's sort of another reason to consider that. There's a lot of question around how genetically modified foods might be affecting us, but it's really hard to tease out at this moment. So another food that I want to talk about that is not technically genetically modified because it wasn't done in a laboratory setting, right? So genetically modified food is a bioengineer sticking genes from this plant into this plant. The Green Revolution was born in the 60s, and it is when modern wheat was born. And it was made with the hopes, and genetically modified food was also made with the hopes of feeding an ever-growing population. Like, oh my God, how are we going to feed these billions and billions of people? Well, the truth of the matter, before I go any further, is that America is throwing away 40% of the food we generate, and the world is throwing away 30% of the food. So we haven't technically gotten to that place yet. And what I think is really concerning is that so wheat and grasses, when they are hybridized, they are very unique and they just keep adding a chromosome. So, humans get together and you get 23 chromosomes from mom and you get 23 chromosomes from dad, and then you get 46 chromosomes, and that is a human. And really, extra chromosomes or less chromosomes are no good. In this situation, the original wheat had 14 chromosomes, and then there was some hybridization that happened, kind of more historically, like hundreds of years ago. But then in the 60s, they were hybridized so much that they came to 42 chromosomes. The other part of this 42 chromosomes is that they made it so that they can spray Roundup. Glyphosate is a known cancer-causing weed killer, and you can spray it on it and it doesn't kill the plant. And in fact, it makes it produce 10% more, which is why conventional farmers oftentimes spray it right before they harvest it so that you have this nice big dose of Roundup, which might be contributing. Some people feel like it's part and parcel of why this wheat is causing so much trouble. So what's really wrong with having these extra chromosomes? One of the things is that it's created new proteins that the body hasn't ever seen that are completely undigestible. And some of these proteins are actually killed insects. They're a natural pesticide by killing and destroying the GI tract and or making them infertile. So the tricky part of this is that, unfortunately, it is really coming to look like these undigestible proteins that are a gluten protein are toxic to our bowels as well. And the way that they're toxic is they cause little micro tears. And the bowel wall is supposed to be completely intact. And it only is supposed to allow through pieces of everything. A protein goes in and gets cut into small amino acids. Those amino acids get absorbed to the body and form building blocks. Carbohydrates are broken down to glucose, and other fats are broken down to small chain fatty acids, et cetera, that are allowed to cross. So what happens with this is that if you get a big scratch, just like if you scratched your skin and how it's supposed to protect us, how bacteria can get in and other things, foreign bodies can get in, things can get in that should not get in, this whole protein goes in and the body's like, wait a minute, what is this thing? It is not me and I need to get rid of it. And so it creates a whole immuno-inflammatory reaction. And I'm going to propose that the kind of immunoreactive inflammatory reaction is probably where your genetics do come in. Like, what kind of reaction are you going to have to this foreign body? Having said that, this foreign molecule goes in, and we have found that it actually directly attaches in the brain. And it doesn't just attach in the brain of anybody who is sensitive to gluten, but it attaches in the brain of everyone. They've done a study, and it has a morphine-like effect. So they've done a study where they actually gave people naloxone, which is an anti-opioid drug, and they found that people ate 20 to 30% less when they took this drug and if they were eating the modern day wheat. And it was really disturbing because it was showing that they were not having the mild euphoria and the craving that happens with something that is like morphine. Not lastly, but another reason why this change of everything is problematic is that it produced new sugars. And now a whole wheat piece of bread made from this modern wheat has a glycemic index of 72, while table sugar has a glycemic index of 59 and Snickers bar has a glycemic index of 41. Why? So what does that mean exactly? So that means that your sugar is going to spike more from a whole wheat piece of bread than it's going to spike from a Snickers bar. This is not endorsing eating Snickers bar, by the way. So it's really a problem. But then why does this matter? And how does it manifest in people? So, you know, the other thing that I should clarify, or I did start to talk about a little bit, is that gluten molecule goes in and it starts to, the body starts to say, hey, what is this? And it's foreign, I need to do something about it. But these gluten molecules look enough like other gluten molecules from other foods, rye and some other grains, so that the cross reactivity, it becomes non-specific and it sort of like becomes all gluten pretty darn fast. So why is this bad for you? So here we are again going to see these particular, this is from Grainbane by Dr. Perlmutter, who is a neurologist. And we're going to see again, obesity. We're seeing a repeat of some things: obesity, type 2 diabetes, ADHD, autism. But we are seeing a few other things here that are sort of new: digestive issues, autoimmune issues, and mood disorder stuff. And then I threw, dairy intolerance was on here too. And I unfortunately have to talk about dairy when I talk about gluten, because most of the people that I made changes on. I took both gluten and dairy out of their diet, sadly. There's a lot of discussion on, is the gluten molecule tearing and then dairy gets across? And because of how dairy is made these days, it used to be that you got dairy from the cow that came to your house. This is what my mom said in India. The cow came to the house, they was milked right in front of you, and then you drank this milk, and it had enzymes in it to break down different parts of the milk, and it was fresh, and it certainly didn't have any antibiotics, hormones, or residual pesticide from the food it ate, or residual parts of genetically modified feed. So it was a very different product, and is that why dairy also kind of falls into this gluten category? But what I will tell you is that lives have been changed by my taking people off of gluten and dairy. I watched a child who was 4 years old with autism go from not speaking to speaking in 2 weeks off of gluten. I've seen numerous kids stop having migraines with either coming off dairy or off gluten or both. I've had kids, teenagers, have a complete stop in their anxiety, panic attacks off of gluten. And I've certainly gotten rid of all kinds of gut issues with people coming off of gluten and dairy. One of the stories I'll share is that I had a child who's having a lot of reflux, and we would take her off of gluten and dairy and she would do great. And then parents felt like it was difficult, so they would put the child back on gluten and dairy, and then we would be back at having problems. And so finally I said, Mom, I need to have a conversation with you without your child here. And and I did that. I kind of said, look, I'm not really interested in scaring you in this situation, but this is a unique place where really she's so symptomatic. And I'm concerned that, when people have reflux for a long time, they can get Barrett's esophagus, which is the precursor to having cancer of the esophagus. The mom's eyes opened really big, and she said, wow, there's a lot of Barrett's esophagus in my family, as well as esophageal cancer. And I was like, wow, that's really concerning. And then she proceeded to tell me that she took 20 Tums a day. And I was like, please come off of gluten and dairy. And she did. And then she stopped having to take 20 Tums a day, which is not a joke as far as a pretty massive improvement in her life, quality of life, and concern for future cancer risk. So this is a bit of a loaded slide, and I have a feeling people will have lots of questions around that. So the good news is that what is good for your body is really, in the end, good for Mother Nature. And what is good for Mother Nature is, in the end, good for your body. And again, we have a lot of choice here. And what I'm really hoping that I shared in this conversation or in this talk is just putting a light on places that were in the dark that perhaps you didn't know, that like, oh God, like I had no idea that conventionally grown food actually still had residual pesticides. I had no idea that genetically modified foods have only been tested by the companies that bring us genetically modified foods. I didn't know it was everywhere. So again, I'm sort of hoping that I've shared with you some really important information, as well as the whole discussion on modern day wheat and what's gone on with that is really concerning. And so here are 10 ways of healing yourself and therefore sort of the world. Eating organic, local, regenerative foods. And if we're eating, dairy and meat products, doing free range grass-fed additionally to organic. Fish is a hot topic in this community. And so I just put out there to check into how sustainable and wild your fish is. Soil health is equal to our health. So I just spent a whole lot of time telling us what negative things can happen to the negative things that are put on our food. But I do want to spend a second saying that, hey, when you eat local, regenerative food just means that it's a sort of farming that really is trying to put nutrients back into the soil by allowing all kinds, by crop rotation and doing all kinds of things that really feed the soil. But when we feed the soil, we are getting back micronutrients that feed our brain. And that's a whole nother conversation, frankly. But the bottom line is that having healthy soil creates healthy people. Avoiding food additives, dyes, artificial sweeteners, corn syrup. American Academy of Pediatrics actually identifies dyes and additives as playing a role in things like ADHD. And what's really, really sad is that European countries and other countries say to US companies, we'll take your product, but we will not have any of these dyes and preservatives in them. And they don't have them in other countries, and they still sell them with them in this country. So really disturbing that, so basically you're trying to avoid as much processed and prepackaged foods because of those reasons, and another reason to go organic with that type of thing. Drinking purified water, I did not talk about this in the talk, but sadly our water sewage systems cannot remove all of the medications that people are on to treat all of the things that I've just talked about. So when you drink unpurified water, you are unfortunately in many places getting dosing of antidepressants, anti-high blood pressure medicines, other mood disorder stuff, birth control pills as well. So drinking purified water is really important, and trying to avoid drinking purified water in plastic bottles. And there's a lot of discussion if water that you buy in plastic bottles is truly purified. So that's a whole different thing. Avoiding plastic and styrofoam containers for food and beverages, and especially avoiding heating or heated foods in these things, because they break down the plastic and the styrofoam and they end up in our body. And we now know that they cause a lot of different harm. Avoiding canned foods in BPA, and avoiding using pesticides, herbicides, fungicides. I just had to put something in about flame retardants, and just being aware of like new furniture you're bringing into your house, carpet you're bringing into your house, making sure all of it is sort of eco-friendly. Considering going gluten-free, this is a big one. I would say that if you have any of the medical conditions that I talked about, you really might try going gluten and dairy-free. Gluten-free, I'm just starting to feel like modern day wheat is a little bit like smoking. Everybody doesn't get cancer, everybody doesn't get COPD, but I'm not sure it's contributing to anybody's health, the modern day wheat. I just discovered that Natural Grocer has einkorn wheat, which is the original wheat that has 14 chromosomes. And I have concerns that there really has to be a phase of healing the gut before you can introduce that, but that's another conversation, but something to think about. Growing your own food and rewilding your yard are other ways of helping your health, and getting out in nature and tending to your body as the temple that it is, and kind of radical self-love and self-responsibility. If people are interested in kind of making some of these changes, The Dirt Cure is a really great book by a pediatric neurologist who practiced medicine in the way that I really practiced it. And she wrote a book, and she gave really wonderful examples of how to do it, and also the science behind why all these foods are a problem. She has a little more detail of that. Brain Brain is also a fabulous book. The one last thing I wanted to share in this is that I wanted to thank Amitabh and Animeshta as well, and just understand that being in this community in and of itself provides resilience. And we have learned that having community is part of having healthy and vital longevity. And, some of the things that we're talking about get offset even by that. Laughter, a 2007 study from the Japanese showed that diabetics who had exposure to either a talk on diabetes or some funny show / comedy routine had really different outcomes in which genes were expressed. And those that had the comedy routine and laughed had an increase in their natural killer cells, which is, anti-cancer cells. And they also had a decreased blood sugar 2 hours after eating. So there are many ways to make a difference in your life. And I hope that I shared some important ways of doing that. And then lastly, I need to just close with this map again and just say that the indigenous people of this land, they actually gave us the Constitution of the United States. The Northeastern Iroquois Confederacy was inspiration. We left out two really important things that they could have given us that we didn't, that the founding fathers did not incorporate. One was equality of women. And the second is this principle. In our every deliberation, we must consider the impacts of our decisions on the next 7 generations. So I'm sort of speaking to you in regards to what we're doing to our own bodies, but what we're doing to the future. And again, I want to thank everyone for this opportunity to give this talk. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Pakhi, for a very nice informative talk. First, I have question, but I will ask you later. First, Arup Majumdar asked a question. Is there any quality difference, even though it says organic? Currently, we are seeing almost every store containing organic food. So that was
Right.
what you mean
So
by the Hy-Vee or Price Chopper Organic and others.
Right. I have to say that what I think, so what I've shared is that I do think there is a difference between organic from different locations. And that is why eating locally as much as humanly possible and really finding sources where you trust the organic. The organic requires a certain label, undeniably, but having said that, I trust the natural grocers organic more than I trust Whole Foods organic. And there are people that are spending their life working towards getting those organic rules to be really, really strong and clear. But having said that, we are able to show that 70,000 people eating an organic diet were able to have a decreased risk of cancer over the course of 7 years. So there's kind of, people are able to determine that. But I agree with you that all organic is not made equally. And the more you can meet your farmer and say, hey, are you doing this organically? And they are, then you can really trust that. So that is the most trustworthy. And then I would say things like natural grocers, et cetera. Does that make sense?
Yeah, this question asked by the Arup Majumdar.
Yeah, so just to follow up on that. So is there any way we can tell from the package, or, is there any parameter we can see in the...
So for something to be USDA organic, it really does have to have that symbol. But I will undeniably, the packaging, this is where getting connected to our local sources is so important. That's where that Ayurvedic thing is like, hey, get sourced locally. And, if something has to come from Timbuktu, then perhaps we may not need to be eating it here because it has to be modified in such a way that it can last from there to there. How many of us went to India, after being in America for a while and was like something like, oh my God, this is what a tomato tastes like again. Oh, I can finally taste cucumber, right? Like how many people had that experience where the farm is just there. So you're bringing a cucumber, this far, and you don't have to hybridize it or genetically modify it so it can sit on the shelf for 2 months. And what we've learned is that it actually has way more nutrition. So I highly recommend starting to meet the farmers of the community. And, it's a little harder though, because people are used to certain foods in their diet. And so that's where we're going to have to start, playing again, Ayurveda. I talked to my Ayurvedic friend before I did this talk, and she said, yeah, in Ayurveda, true Ayurveda would not say, bring this from 5,000 miles away. True Ayurveda says, what grows here? What grows without pesticides? What easily comes up and is trying to feed you right now? And so you might have to change your diet to suit the locale if you're going to move. So a little hard to stomach, I think, for this community.
So a good option maybe the farmers market, local.
So you have to be, so farmer markets are great if they are in fact bringing you local organic produce. I was really disappointed and had a conversation with someone the other day that the river market is not local or organic or anything, but there are small pop-ups that happen throughout the summer that really are local and organic. And the more we ask for it, the more it's going to happen. And so, Natural Grocer, I think, is a really great source because I think they try to go as local as possible and they try to go as organic and really organic, more so than Whole Foods, I would say, hands down.
Yeah, there is another question came, I think, Amit, that can you tell some of the common genetically modified foods which we can eat,
which you can avoid?
Yeah, while we eat every day, but they are genetically modified.
Right. So interestingly, so any of the prepackaged foods that have corn syrup, soy. So there was that slide that I can go back to that talks about what is primarily, and I can't go back to it. Here, let me pull it up so I can at least look at it. But it's corn, but interestingly, sweet corn the kind of corn on the cob, I just discovered, I didn't realize this until I did this talk, actually, corn on the cob is usually not genetically modified, but the corn that is made into corn syrup and used in packaged foods is primarily, and soy is like 90%, 94% of soybeans in America are genetically modified, 92% of all corn and cotton, sugar beets, and canola oil. But the trick with that corn, you guys, is that they're feeding that genetically modified corn to all the animals and to, you know, your chickens that are making eggs. And so that genetically modified feed is ending up in your milk and eggs and meats. So it's very, very, unfortunately, super ubiquitous unless you go organic and really try to eat locally.
Yeah, there is another question from Ovik Dhar. He asked that what are some ways specifically we can start to change our diet? Can we go directly to organic, or do we wean off the genetically modifieds?
No. You can tomorrow just be like, I'm not buying this stuff anymore. And you can go to the grocery store and really go to and just buy, you know, all organic food. And, you know, again, you know, if you feel like, hey, it feels really expensive and overwhelming, then I think using that guide for the environmental working group is really useful, because they speak to like, hey, these are the foods you really don't want to eat that are, you know, really laden with chemicals. And I would honestly say that your eggs and your dairy and your meat, you really want that stuff to be organic, because the amount of antibiotics and hormones and genetically modified feed that ends up in your body via that particular vehicle is a lot. And so you're seeing a lot of stuff that you don't want to see. So you can make that switch as quickly as you can. But, you know, the other thing that is super interesting that I heard from someone was like, you know, when you go organic, what's cheapest, what's on sale in organic world is what's in season. And that's what you're supposed to be eating technically. So it becomes a little bit cheaper, and it becomes a little bit more, you know, then it becomes a little bit more like how you grew up in India. You know, mom talks about, you know, mango season and different, dad talked about the first cauliflower of the year season. And you start to eat with the season. And in Ayurveda, it talks about how the food is nourishing us for that season. In this country, they talk about elderberry, and that if you make elderberry from your local world, that you're actually going to be protected from the viruses and the things that are coming up in this area. So there's a lot of different reasons why Ayurveda actually said that a long time ago. And I think the more we can start to say, okay, what do we do with this vegetable that I've never heard of in all of my life, and maybe I add some turmeric and some mustard seed to that. You know, maybe we alter what we're eating because to what's available, and what's available will be cheaper, honestly, as well, than, you know, something hauled from all over God's creation that's organic.
I don't see any more question yet, but I am here, devil's advocate.
Yeah.
You mentioned about the gluten.
Yeah.
Gluten in the grain is also good for reason. The reason is that grain, because it's a protein, it can interact with other molecules and make the structure is stable structure, and that's why probably gluten is there. And gluten might have some, because it's a natural, comes the natural, not I'm talking about modified or things like that. When you have in the grain, the gluten is there and they are natural right inside there. So that might have some advantageous effect in our body.
Right. So here's the thing, though. We don't tend to do much with whole proteins in our body, meaning we don't. So the original einkorn wheat, that the 14 chromosomes, the gluten that is in that wheat is actually a little more digestible, right? And so it gets broken down to amino acids, and or if it's a fiber that can't be broken down, it doesn't actually damage the lining of the wall. So what's being said here is modern wheat has a gluten molecule that is particularly toxic to our body. There is a guy that wrote the book Wheat Belly, and he's trying to say, hey, even ancient grains, I'm not so sure about. And there's some other people that are saying some grains because we were, pre-agriculture. There are people that are gone paleo, right? The people that have gone paleo are all saying, hey, at one point we were all hunters and gatherers, and we were not cultivating, hundreds of billions of kinds of rice. Having said that, in India, we have a 5,000-year-old tradition of Ayurveda that had rice, as part of a staple. So when I talked to my Ayurvedic friend about that, she's like, yeah, there are important vitamins in these grains. And so she would not, she tried going paleo and she's like, it was horrible for me. And so, she wouldn't recommend that. Having said that, even in India, they had 100,000 varieties of rice, and now they're down to 6,000 varieties. So it's variety that produces some different kinds of micronutrients, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that the biggest problem that I have is with modern day wheat that has created particular gluten molecules that unfortunately the body, once it's seen this one with maybe the glyphosate, that Roundup attached, it cross-reacts with other gluten in other foods that didn't used to be reactive for people in general. It's just that it's gone into the body, and that's where all these food allergies. So I have, technically, I've seen kids have food allergies to like 8 different things, but they don't show up on regular testing. They're showing up on kind of unique testing because that's not where we're looking. And once we take all those things out of the diet and heal the gut, there is the hope that they can add back all these other foods except for modern day wheat that is damaging the gut in the first place. Does that make any sense? I don't know if I was clear on that answer.
Well, another question is that, about corn. Corn is number one in the United States, is the number one product, grain product, and that has been used, not only the feed to animals, that has been used for many energy, alcohol, and many things. So for that reason, they wanted to grow more, and that's why they are using some of the genetic material to understand this, so.
Right. So I guess what I would say to that, though, is that I'm a little concerned that this is a monocrop, right? You have fields and fields. We all have driven by fields and fields of this genetically modified corn where there's no other thing growing. And literally there's no other thing growing. When you spray all this stuff down, the soil is actually losing all the mycelium. Like all the little mushroom things, they're all gone, and the dirt is dead. And the only thing that can grow there is this corn that gets sprayed with this particular pesticide. And some of them need the pesticide to actually grow. So we've made this very Frankenstein. So, this is where I ask you, the 7-generation question.
Yeah.
If we keep this up, where are we going, right?
Yeah. So there is a statement from Cheyenne saying that 40% of organic corn is imported, and that's true. So most of the corn we are making here as organic is going to be outside, not staying in our country. Mostly it has been at least 40% is importing, the organic corn.
Imported or exported, I guess.
Well, yeah. Well, it has been coming from other sources,
Right. So we're not growing it. Is that what he was saying? That
Yeah.
we're buying it?
Yeah. So, and then another question is, how about other whole grains like oats, barley, rice? Are those safe to eat from? That's from Sonali.
Yeah. So, here's the thing that I'm really bumping up against, that, with my patients, I would take them off gluten, and some of the things that you mentioned, rye, barley, have gluten in them. And because of that cross reaction, I found that I had to take them off of everything. I am sort of proposing to you, if you're really having none of these medical problems, if none of those things are problems for you, then perhaps getting off of the modern wheat is all you have to do. And you can totally take part in these other glutens, because those other glutens were not in and of themselves toxic and attacking the lining per se, if that makes sense. So it's really the modern day wheat that is the sort of like, busting a hole in. There are some people that are concerned about these other things, but I have to admit, in talking to my Ayurvedic practitioner friend, I'm not as concerned about that. But once the holes go in, that's when the real challenge happens, because that's when you become sensitized to a whole bunch of things that you weren't going to be sensitized to otherwise. And the glyphosate sprayed on that is also busting holes in our lining. I don't know if I answered that question. I think that, again, I'm not asking everyone to go grain-free. If that's the bottom line question, that is not my suggestion.
But glutens are mostly the celiac disease kids who has the celiac diseases that has been showing some problem in gluten.
Yeah. So here's what I'll say to that. So celiac is a very specific autoimmune response to the gluten molecule. And that has existed for a very long time. Celiac, there has been. But the celiac numbers have also done this. And it is a very specific autoimmune reaction. But what I and many people that I kind of quoted in this talk are proposing and saying is that there are other ways in which gluten sensitivity is happening. And when you test for it for celiac, you're not going to see it. But there are some other ways to test certain antibodies in the stool, other kinds of blood tests that are not usually available in regular medical settings, but in more functional medical settings. But I found that they were so expensive, and it was just easier to try somebody off of gluten for a month and just say, for kids, I could do it for 2 weeks and see what happened. In adults, it's really a month. And if you're having any of these medical problems, I kind of say gluten and dairy, unfortunately, kind of live together for a variety of reasons. And so it's both. But yeah, but if you're not having any of these problems, then I'd love for you to just go modern day wheat free and go from there.
Well, we can open now and have some discussion, right? Amit and Aru.
So I really want to thank you. Thanks, Dr. Pakhi, and thank you, Dr. Dhar, for this inaugural show. And Pakhi, really, you brought many important and thoughtful issues which we are facing day to day. And I hope that your recommendation and your all the points you raised will help our community to think and to plan better, because it's not an overnight process. It's a long-term process, but there is no special day to start following recommendation. We can start from now. So if we start from now, probably it will be an inspiration for others, and it goes, it's a cascade. Like if I'll do something, and if other person will see that, I'm very prone to eating all the fries, and if somebody will see me that I'm going to buy some organic food, then probably the other person will get motivated. So I will start following your advice from now onwards. So Dr. Dhar, thank you for your...
Shayan, Shayan might have some question.
So thank you, Anamir. Pakhi, really interesting talk and very informative. Thanks so much. Quick question and following up on, well, first a comment. I think one of the things that I know, at least just by, researching a little bit about the organic food industry, there are a lot of skeptics. People don't want to buy organic because, like the question asked by Arup Mujumdar, which is that, people think that, well, is it really organic? That's one of the questions. And a lot of folks, they think, well, the labeling, it may not be correct, and there may be people or industries taking advantage. And that's why I posted that comment that about 40% of the data I saw was like 40% of organic corn that's sold as organic corn or fed, because we just don't have we have the capacity, but due to other controls and farmers not getting quick certifications of becoming organic producer. Sometimes, about 40% of corn comes from abroad, and 60% of soybeans, organic soybeans, comes from outside of the US. And those things are relatively a lot, quality is not as well controlled as, by the USDA organic. So that's just a comment. So that's one of the reasons why people often, they're skeptic. But My question for you is following up what Amitabh said, that it's a long-term process. So for those of us, this organic certification, I think came in like early 90s when this whole thing started about what's organic, and there was a system in the US. So it's already been 20 years for people like me, or in some places like 30 years. So when is enough damage done that where even if you stop, because all of these 20, 30 years we have been ingesting all of these things unknowingly or knowingly, either way. So is there a point, like a threshold, where you say, okay, now even if I stop consuming all that, there's probably enough damage done that it might not help me? So is there a threshold like that, or?
No, I don't think there is a threshold. I mean, I think this is really speaking to something like exercise, right? Like, if you exercise a ton, for 10 years, and then you just stop exercising, are you going to reap the benefits of exercising for 10 years? Unfortunately not. But in this situation, the good news is that I think that if you stop, putting pesticides into your body, then all the systems that are intended to just go back to repairing get to do their work unabated, right? And so that's a really lovely situation for your body to be able to be free of things that are harming it. So it's sort of like, you're just getting out of the line of fire. Sure, have some fires just started going, but that's why I showed that that screen of epigenetics, that there's your genes, there's your environment, and then there's your behavior. And we have a lot of protective behavior. And I cannot reiterate enough that even just being part of this community is making it such probably that everyone here is just a little bit healthier than your peers. And I think we can see that. I mean, I think that we don't see the same level of morbid obesity in this population. If you walk outside the door and just go to Walmart, you're just not seeing exactly the same thing. Is it some of the foods that are being eaten, the turmeric, the saffron, all of these other pieces too. So I think that I don't think that there ever comes a day that you give up on yourself and say, I've already eaten non-organic my whole life. I'm probably full of those 200 chemicals, and whatever's going to happen is going to happen. I don't think that's the case.
Wonderful. A lot of hopes for people like me.
Yeah, indeed. A lot of hope for everybody, frankly.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, you got a lot of accolades, said very informative information. Thanks you, Dr. Pakhi. Devjit Kanjilal said very informative session. Thank you, Dr. Pakhi, for all the details. It really helpful. It's a lot of people are getting help from your talk, definitely.
Great. And yeah, it's the whole gluten-free, dairy-free thing is a really, it's a tricky thing to walk. And if you are dealing with medical issues, I love the book, The Dirt Cure, because I think it is sort of how I practice medicine and how it walked people through how you figure out what's actually causing problems for you. And so maybe you are a person that could just go gluten-free or just dairy-free, or again, the gluten thing. And then, I will, maybe there will be a follow-up in a year about this non-modern wheat, the einkorn wheat that I just discovered is available at Natural Grocer. And can we heal our gut and then start eating a wheat that was around for thousands and thousands of years, prior? I don't know about thousands of thousands, but no, I think thousands of thousands.
Also, I also mentioned you that we are taking cooking oil, the mustard oil, and mustard oil is not a cooking oil in United States because it has uric acid that can cause myocardial infarction or myocardial disease. But we are eating all over all the time in our life. People are in India eating. There are some heart diseases, but nobody can identify exactly that this oil is responsible for that,
Right. And so I investigated that mustard oil thing a little bit because mom and dad were interested in introducing that into our cooking. And I found some online organic, and it looked like it was fair trade. And there are different ways to sort of see like, okay, I think I can trust this source a little bit because they give the whole story anyway. But in looking into that, Ayurveda has a very specific discussion on mustard oil, and that it doesn't talk about this piece of it. And, I think that, Animashta, more than maybe most, that whole foods versus little parts of foods being extracted and then being studied. And
Exactly.
when it's in the whole,
Definitely.
it acts very differently than when it's being extracted and studied separately. And so I think that there's some of that that's gone on, and mustard oil got a really bad name. By the way, there's a lot of discussion that industries in the United States, the corn industry, really pushed for saying that coconut oil was bad for you and the oil was bad. They pushed for making sure that other oils were considered bad for your health so that they could push their oil. I was telling my parents the other day that I got a pamphlet from the corn industry that said, did you know that corn syrup is good for you? And it was for physicians, and it was a threefold thing. I mean, they're trying very hard. Let's not forget that they are a huge money-making industry, and they sadly are pulling the wool over people's eyes and making it so this is a quiet discussion and nobody really knows about it.
Kanjilal family, their daughters, they also said that excellent presentation, with information details. And thank you, Dr. Pakhi. And also, Shayon sent some website about the economy and levels and organics from Washington Post. So
right, which is again speaks to my burning desire for all of us to meet our local farmers and start to talk to people, grow your own food, meet your farmers, meet people, find out. And so, the truth is that if you meet your farmers, sometimes they can't afford to get organically certified. But they will, but they're, their heart's in it, and they say, look, I don't use pesticides and I don't use anything, and I do regenerative farming. If you trust this person, they might be working towards organic certification, but they might be able to sell it to you cheaper because they don't have to pay for that huge thing. So it depends on, who you get to know and what they're doing.
Yeah, I think Paramita wants to say something.
Yes, Animeshta. Pakhi, thank you so much for this information. It is just hugely, it's a lot of information, but at least there is some beginning somewhere. And I just thought of something that came to mind because I've been seeing Ayurvedic specialists back in India, and they talk about eating fresh, locally grown food and food that's, all the things that you talked about, not probably going into as much detail about being organic versus non-organic. Over there, maybe it didn't matter so much. But this emphasis is so much on fresh food. And the reason I see Ayurvedic specialists is because I have a pain factor. And I realized that when I'm in India, my pain is a lot less, significantly less than when I'm here. And it just, after hearing your talk, it dawned on me that it must be the foods that's doing this to my system. And I need to make very conscious effort in just seeking out organic foods and looking up your chart and seeing, okay, if I were not to get something organic, then what can I still afford to get for me, and what should I completely avoid? And the fact that the meats that we use, even if you're not huge meat eaters, but the eggs that we use a lot, or those have so much of pesticides in them. That's again a big, light bulb for me. So thank you so much for this talk. Can't thank you enough, and we'll be in touch with you if ever these ever more questions come up. And you mentioned 2 books, and would love to look them up.
Yeah, I think they would be really helpful for you to actually look at those books, because there's just a lot of details on how to do it and what to look for, especially with pain stuff. So
it's so interesting. I have one last question that, you mentioned about the water and plastic. Okay. So can you explain a little bit, because a lot of people don't know that, we drink water in the plastic bottle,
Yeah. Well, so the one, number one is the sad reality of people putting tap water into those plastic bottles. And, people have heard of that in India all day long, but it happens here too. And there's a lot of data showing that bottled water isn't actually cleared in any way. And then secondly, those bottles of water have been heated and cooled and this and that, they're on a truck from here to there and then whatever. And so we do know that plastic degrades over time, especially when heated and cooled and all of that. And so, the plastic makes it into the water, and it is yet another sort of assault on the system as an endocrine disruptor. So then, if you manage to miss that hit on that direction, then the other direction that you sadly can get it is that then plastic becomes something that goes into the environment and doesn't go away. And, there's that big, gyrus in the ocean, or several of them now, that are now breaking down into microplastics. So then the fish eat it. So how much plastic are you eating in your fish these days, right? It just goes on, that whatever we're doing to the earth, we're really doing directly to our body. And there's just a bit of a time lapse, frankly. And that has made it so that it's a little harder to understand what the problem is. And so that's why Anumishta, actually, when I did the practice of this with them, he asked me if there's been death by gluten. And I was like, there hasn't been an obvious, beyond celiac, whatever, but it's a slow burn. All of these things are a slow burn, which has made it, that much harder to put your finger on what's going on. And that's why everyone is in their silo, oh, I've got this medical problem and it just sucks really bad. And I, as a physician, was like, okay, it's getting really weird that every kid that I'm meeting has some major medical problem when 20 years ago, they really did not. So what's changed? And this has changed. And so that's what's really concerning, and why I was like, I can't do this one at a time anymore. So I'm so appreciative of this opportunity to at least, tell this group of people, and then I'll share it with friends and have them share it, because I just need people to hear that there are things going on that are not beyond our control, but are beyond our knowledge right now. And if we get that information, that we can make different and important choices.
And a lot of people don't know that, the receipt of Walmart or the Price Chopper, that contains the similar toxic substance as you can see in the bottle.
Right,
bottle.
that BPA, right. So yeah, there's this whole thing about why is this still going on, right? Is the other question. We know that this stuff is toxic, but these receipts that you get, you don't want to handle receipts extensively because they have the chemical on them. And so it goes a little crazy, which is again, why we all need to, that's why there's a group of people saying, hey, we need what's called the precautionary principle. In Europe, they do have a little bit more of the precautionary principle, which is, hey, can something be, can we say we don't know what's going to happen until they prove that it's safe before it actually gets on market? But we again have the chemical is innocent until proven guilty, and it takes 20, 30, 100 years to decide that something is bad for you. Lead took 100 years from the first known person to have a lead intoxication / death by lead. And to the point where we realize that any lead is causing, kids will lose 1 or 2 IQ points depending on what the lead level, even if it's just a few points. And it took 100 years to ban lead from gas. So yeah, it just takes a long time to prove something's guilty.
Yeah.
Dr. Tapan Chaudhary has one question, but after this question, we will stop the live stream and we'll stop recording. Then we will keep the 15 minutes for some informal session with Dr. Pakhi. I'm sure many people want to.
Dr. Badal Roy, thanks to Pakhi and the organizer. It is very informative and helpful. Shormista Banerjee also said, thank you so much for the session, Dr. Pakhi.
Okay, Tapanda, you can ask question. You need to unmute yourself.
Amitabh, first I congratulate you for initiating this kind of forum. I think that is going to be very helpful now and for the future. And of course, Animesh also for conducting this. We have at home, we have a lot of discussion about what Pakhi does. And of course, Animesh said that he was the devil's advocate. I am the devil's advocate there. And we had our Because it is hard. It is difficult because I have not eaten a samosa for the last 4 months, and I do not like that at all. But I congratulate Pakhi for bringing this into our consciousness because this is real. I do not know to what extent, but she is also bringing this consciousness to others. For example, she would go to Touch of Asia, and we brought some food. We asked them to do organic food, and they did it for us, which means that they can do it for others too.
Yeah.
So this is one thing. And from our previous discussions, two things I wanted to be kind of a public knowledge, because we were talking about this, whether this gluten, this wheat, really do they cause any problem or not. But Pakhi's information was that the kids who were sick here and could not take the wheat locally, they would go to, for example, Europe on vacation, and they could eat anything they want to without any problem, which is I think, a very interesting, interesting. Yeah, my words are not.
Yeah, no, and that's true. I mean, it was very interesting to watch kids who would go on a family vacation to Europe, Saudi Arabia, and they were just like, we were in France and there was no other food but bread and cheese, and we had to eat it. And then they were like, and then we were fine, and they were shocked. And then they came back to the United States. These are not celiac kids. These are kids that just were off gluten because of behavioral problems, autistic spectrum, what have you. And then it didn't have the negative effect. And so some of these other countries have a different form of wheat that they're using, and it seems to work out fine for them.
And the last thing I'd like to tell others from our discussion in the past, that you said that we do not have knowledge about whether some of these things cause any problem. In fact, we don't have any knowledge about the products. We just accept it and do it. But the scary thing is that we know some of the products which are toxic and causes cancer, etc., but still it is being used, not banned. And this is related to the lawsuit, etc. So can you talk about?
Yeah, so my dad is referring to the fact that we just got a robocall the other day saying that Monsanto or Roundup, which is glyphosate, which is sprayed on modern day wheat, is offering $10 billion. They did a settlement for anybody that has had lymphoma or a certain kind of leukemia and can show that they use Roundup. And so it's still, it literally is still on the shelves at Home Depot and Walmart and on Amazon today. It has been banned in other countries, but the United States is sort of pretty hands off when it comes to these chemicals and giving them a very major free ride. And so that was that concept of the precautionary principle that I really wanted to push, that there are people that are trying to get legislation that says, hey, things have to be proven to be safe before they come on the market, as opposed to take 100 years to come off the market. So yeah, but it's 1 out of 3 products apparently has some sort of toxic something going on, and that's what's happening.
Well, every good thing has some end, and we'll think about this session and this topic. So friends, whoever are watching us through our live stream, through Facebook Live, please, it is our small endeavor we have started today, and we'll try to keep this once in a month. And I'm very happy to let you know that we have our next 6 months are booked basically. So we have 6 guest speakers already wants to say something to you and share their experience. So thank you for watching us, and we'll meet you soon. Stay well, stay safe, and have a booster vaccine if you have already taken 2 doses of COVID vaccines. So let me stop the live stream and let me stop the recording.